myself CA Pankaj Zara welcome you back on Startup Pathshala series. Last day we had a thought of process that what is a startup. Everybody was blinking around at startup, startup, startup. Today we are about to start the concept of startup. Exactly what is defined as a startup. I can say that from my experience and all that fundamentals I have been gathering the information on the startup. There's definitely no law on the startup front. Like we have a income tax for Income Tax Act, for goods and service taxation we have GST Act, we have international taxation for companies, we have a corporate law, for partnerships we have a Partnership Act. But there is no such as Startup Act in India or startup law in India which is defining the startup definitions. So, what is this going on? What is this bluffing, blunder, blooming going on across India? There is a startup, 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 but there is no proper concept of act. So, where does it gets an inside edge, and where does it gets an inside bloom that what is defined as a startup? So, we have to study overall analysis of many acts at a single time, which defines a startup in a very refined manner. A small definition is defined by Government of India in DPIIT. Hey, what's DPIIT? It's a Department for Promotion of Internal and Industry Policy. So DPIIT is the main agency which has defined the startup. Now, before going to DPIIT, whether there is a startup which has an startup but not registered under DPIIT, or a startup which is done by a singular when not going to DPIIT, or a startup which is registered under DPIIT. So, exactly what is a startup? So, we can clear up on the minds that any startup having a few initial stages of a starting generation of a company which is in an initial stage for solving any problem or any development, any product or any process. Like I was discussing with my friend, like how you define a startup. Like an Apple company had came a project with an Nike shoes that these days we all are phobia of a sale. We cannot have a life without internet connections, mobiles. We cannot have without charging. So when we go for outstations, when there are hilly stations where traveling, we don't find the socket points. And how do you get the charging points? So they came at a concept of charging a mobile while running through a shoes. Shoes will provide a charging point and you can charge upon. So this is what a new concept. This is startup. Or running a vehicle on water, running a vehicle on air, something defining which is we are not usually doing on a regular basis, but we are sometimes we are doing on a regular basis but need some kind of innovation and technology. Like the sources of we can say about the startup is many definitions we can define about understanding that startup is in doing the things in a very different manner. Like I was discussing my friend, usually we wear a clothes made of cotton, but sometimes some says that we can make a cloth from pomegranate, papaya, like spinach. We can make it from anything wheat. We can make it out. You can think of making it these things enough. You can think of making an cloth from water, some kind of milks. So this is what an idea which needs to be crystally converted into a scalable, viable product. This is the first part that we need to understand, that a startup is in some idea where or product or a process which needs to be time saving, time consuming, or some innovative product which has never been thought of before, or services like a Zomato, Swiggy. These were all part of the startups industry. You can say WhatsApp, Twitter. These were all the initial days ideas which were later on commercially successfully made into a concept of startup. So this is what we define a startup means, and a product, process, or a service which is there for employment generation and for wealth creation. These are the most fundamental concept for defining a startup. So coming with this idea, DPIIT has defined the startup concept as a company which has been registered in India for 10 years and your turnover should not cross 100 crores is defined as a startup. And only three kind of entities are permissible as a startup, that is limited company, partnership, and LLP. Partnership is also a registered and unregistered. There are two kind of partnership, but unregistered is not recognized at all. So keep in mind. And once versa, there are many kinds of another kind of definition which can gives an idea that another kind of startup can happen. Many people come to me, say about, sir, I want to do registration of my startup in an proprietorship. I want to do in a trust format, I want to do in a society format, I want to do in a cooperative society format. You can definitely, you can do it, but you will not get the status of DPIIT. You can do in that format, but you will not getting. So why, what's a dilemma? I can do startup in another formats, but what is this DPIIT then important? So DPIIT comes here a important major role playing, which defines the startup status in India. Every country has its own startup status defined. Maybe it's America, maybe it's Europe, maybe the Asian countries part. They have defined the startup according to their country definitions.